The desert heat shimmered off the concrete runway at Forward Operating Base Phoenix as Navy SEAL Medic Hospital Corpsman First Class Marcus Rivera stepped off the transport helicopter. The rhythmic thump of rotor blades gradually faded, replaced by the distant rumble of generators and the sharp crack of small arms fire from the training range. Marcus adjusted his medical kit and surveyed the sprawling military installation that would be his home for the next 8 months. At 28 years old, Marcus had already completed 3 combat deployments, but FOB Phoenix presented unique challenges. Located in a volatile region where insurgent activity remained high, the base served as a critical hub for special operations throughout the theater. The medical facility here wasn't just treating routine injuries and illnesses. They were dealing with the most severe combat casualties from high-risk missions conducted by elite units operating in the surrounding area. Marcus made his way to the medical compound, a collection of reinforced concrete buildings connected by covered walkways. The smell of disinfectant mixed with desert dust hit him as he entered the main treatment facility. The head nurse, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, greeted him with a firm handshake and a knowing look that suggested she had seen plenty of medics come and go. "Rivera, right? We've been expecting you. Hope you're ready to hit the ground running because we're short-staffed and the operational tempo here is intense," she said, leading him through the facility. "You'll be working primarily with trauma cases from special operations. The teams here push the envelope, and when things go wrong, they go very wrong." The tour revealed a well-equipped medical facility, but Marcus could see the strain on the staff, dark circles under eyes, hurried movements, and the tension that came from constantly dealing with life and death situations. In the intensive care unit, he observed several patients in various stages of recovery from complex injuries. The attending physician, Major David Chun, briefly explained the cases as they walked through. Triple amputee from an IED strike, brain trauma from a sniper round that somehow didn't kill him, and this young Marine who took shrapnel to the chest cavity, Major Chun explained in clinical tones, though Marcus detected the underlying emotion. "Every case here pushes our capabilities to the limit. That's why we need medics with your background." Marcus had earned his reputation through a combination of technical excellence and an unusual ability to remain calm under the most extreme pressure. His previous deployments had included several incidents where his quick thinking and medical skills had saved lives that others might have considered lost causes. But what set him apart wasn't just his medical knowledge. It was his willingness to challenge authority when patient care was at stake. During his first week at FOB Phoenix, Marcus familiarized himself with the unique protocols and procedures that govern medical care in this environment. The base operated under the command of Brigadier General William Hartwell, a career infantry officer known for his aggressive tactical approaches and rigid adherence to military hierarchy. General Hartwell had built his reputation on successful operations that often pushed the boundaries of acceptable risk, and he expected his staff to support those operations without question. The general made his expectations clear during Marcus's first medical staff briefing. Standing at the podium in the main conference room, his weathered face bore the lines of someone who had spent decades in combat zones. His voice carried the authority of absolute command as he addressed the assembled medical personnel. "Ladies and gentlemen, our mission here is to support special operations that directly impact national security. Every decision we make must prioritize the continuation of those operations. Medical evacuations, treatment protocols, and resource allocation must all serve the greater tactical picture. I expect complete cooperation with operational commanders, and I will not tolerate medical personnel who think they can override tactical decisions with emotional responses to individual casualties." Marcus listened carefully, already sensing potential conflicts between the general's operational priorities and the medical oath he had sworn to uphold. After the briefing, he approached Lieutenant Commander Walsh for clarification on certain protocols that seemed to contradict standard medical ethics. "The general expects medical decisions to support operational objectives," she explained carefully. "Sometimes that means making difficult choices about resource allocation and evacuation priorities. It's not always black and white out here, Rivera. You'll understand once you've been here longer." Over the following weeks, Marcus began to understand the complex dynamics at play. The special operations teams conducting missions in the region were engaged in activities that required absolute secrecy and often operated in areas where traditional medical evacuation was impossible or extremely dangerous. When casualties occurred, medical personnel had to make decisions based not only on medical need but also on operational security and tactical considerations. The first major test of these competing priorities came during Marcus's third week at the base. A special operations team had been conducting a reconnaissance mission deep in hostile territory when they encountered unexpected resistance. The team leader, Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, had taken a rifle round to the abdomen during the firefight. The bullet had caused severe internal bleeding, and the team was requesting immediate medical evacuation. General Hartwell convened an emergency meeting in the Tactical Operations Center to discuss the situation. The room was filled with operational commanders, intelligence officers, and medical staff. Large monitors displayed satellite imagery of the area where the team was pinned down, showing hostile forces converging on their position. The extraction helicopter would have to fly directly through an area with known surface-to-air missile capabilities, explained Colonel Patricia Santos, the operations officer. We're looking at a high probability of losing the aircraft and crew in addition to the ground team. The operational value of this particular mission is classified, but I can tell you that these men are carrying intelligence that could prevent significant future casualties. Major Chun presented the medical perspective, explaining that Staff Sergeant Morrison's condition was critical, but potentially treatable if they could get him to the medical facility within the next few hours. However, he acknowledged the tactical realities that made immediate evacuation extremely dangerous. General Hartwell listened to all perspectives before making his decision. His face remained impassive as he weighed operational security against the life of one soldier. The mission takes precedence. The team will extract on foot to the alternate pickup zone. Medical support will be provided at that location if feasible. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he realized what this meant. The alternate pickup zone was 8 miles away through hostile territory. With Morrison's injuries, the chances of him surviving that journey were minimal. But challenging a general's tactical decision in front of the operational staff would be career suicide and potentially undermine military discipline in a critical situation. As the meeting concluded and personnel dispersed to implement the general's orders, Marcus found himself grappling with a fundamental conflict between military hierarchy and medical ethics. The Hippocratic Oath he had sworn demanded that he prioritize patient care above all other considerations. Yet the military chain of command required absolute obedience to lawful orders, and the general's decision, however callous it might seem, was based on legitimate tactical concerns. Lieutenant Commander Walsh noticed Marcus's troubled expression as they left the operations center. "It's hard the first time you see it," she said quietly. "But you have to understand that General Hartwell has prevented hundreds of casualties through his tactical decisions. Sometimes saving one life costs many more." That night, Marcus lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling as the distant sound of helicopter rotors reminded him of the ongoing operation. He thought about Staff Sergeant Morrison, probably growing weaker by the hour as his team attempted the dangerous overland journey to the extraction point. He thought about the general's words about operational priorities and the greater tactical picture. Most of all, he thought about the oath he had sworn and what it meant to be a military medic in a war zone where impossible choices were made every day. The radio chatter from the operation continued throughout the night, providing periodic updates on the team's progress. Morrison was still alive, but barely conscious. The team was moving slowly, constantly evading hostile patrols while carrying their wounded teammate. Marcus monitored the communications, knowing that with each passing hour, Morrison's chances of survival decreased dramatically. By dawn, the team had covered only half the distance to the extraction point. Morrison had lost consciousness completely, and his vital signs were deteriorating rapidly. The events that were about to unfold would test every aspect of his training, his courage, and his commitment to both his medical oath and his military service. 3 days after Staff Sergeant Morrison's team finally reached the extraction point, Marcus received word that Morrison had died during emergency surgery at the main hospital. The news hit the medical staff hard, particularly those who had argued for immediate evacuation. Marcus found himself questioning not just the decision-making process, but the entire framework that governed medical care in combat zones. The atmosphere at FOB Phoenix became noticeably tense in the days following Morrison's death. The special operations teams were aware of what had happened, and many questioned whether medical support would be available when they needed it most. General Hartwell maintained his position that operational security had to take precedence, but Marcus could see the doubt creeping into the eyes of the soldiers preparing for missions. During this period, Marcus began documenting the medical challenges he observed, keeping detailed notes about cases where military protocols conflicted with optimal medical care. He wasn't planning any formal action, but his medical training had taught him the importance of analyzing cases to improve future outcomes. What he was documenting, however, was a pattern of decisions that prioritized operational concerns over medical ethics in ways that often proved counterproductive even from a tactical standpoint. The breaking point came on a humid Thursday morning when Marcus was assigned to support a high-priority special operations mission. SEAL Team 6 was conducting a raid on a suspected terrorist safe house where intelligence suggested they would find evidence of planned attacks against American targets. The mission was considered extremely important, with direct oversight from National Command Authority. The SEAL team consisted of 8 operators led by Lieutenant Commander Michael Torres, a veteran of dozens of special operations with a reputation for bringing his men home safely. The team had been rehearsing the mission for weeks, studying satellite imagery and intelligence reports to plan every detail of the assault. Marcus was assigned as the mission medic, responsible for providing immediate medical care during the operation and coordinating any necessary evacuations. The pre-mission briefing took place in a secure conference room where classified materials covered every surface. General Hartwell personally conducted the briefing, emphasizing the critical nature of the intelligence they expected to recover. The safe house was located in a densely populated urban area with narrow streets that would make helicopter operations extremely difficult. This mission has been months in the planning, and the intelligence we're expecting to find could prevent attacks that would kill hundreds of American civilians, General Hartwell explained to the assembled team. The operational window is narrow, and we cannot afford any delays or complications that might compromise mission success. Medical support will be provided, but evacuation procedures must not interfere with the primary objective. Lieutenant Commander Torres raised concerns about the limited evacuation options, noting that the nearest helicopter landing zone was several blocks away through potentially hostile streets. General Hartwell acknowledged the challenges but made his position clear. If casualties occur, they will be treated in place until the mission is complete. No exceptions. The intelligence we're seeking is time-sensitive, and any delay could result in the loss of critical information that protects American lives. Marcus felt the familiar knot in his stomach as he recognized the same prioritization of mission over medical care that had contributed to Morrison's death. However, as a military medic assigned to the mission, his duty was to support the operation while providing the best possible medical care within the constraints imposed by operational necessity. The mission launched at 3 in the morning under cover of darkness. Marcus rode in the second vehicle of the convoy, his medical kit containing everything he might need to treat combat injuries in a hostile environment. The team moved through empty streets toward their objective, using night vision equipment to navigate without external lighting. The safe house appeared unremarkable from the outside, a 3-story concrete building identical to dozens of others in the neighborhood. However, intelligence suggested it contained not only the terrorist cell they were targeting, but also weapons and explosives that made the assault particularly dangerous. The plan called for simultaneous entry from multiple points, with the SEALs moving quickly to secure the building before the occupants could destroy evidence or detonate any explosive devices. Marcus positioned himself in the designated casualty collection point, a small courtyard behind the building where wounded personnel could be brought for immediate treatment. From this position, he could hear the sounds of the assault beginning, muffled explosions as the SEALs breached the doors, followed by rapid gunfire and shouted commands. The first casualty arrived within minutes. Petty Officer Second Class David Kim had taken a rifle round to the shoulder during the initial entry. The bullet had fractured his collarbone and caused significant bleeding, but the wound wasn't immediately life-threatening. Marcus quickly assessed the injury and began treatment, applying pressure dressings and starting an intravenous line to replace lost fluids. As Marcus worked on Kim, he monitored the radio communications from inside the building. The SEALs were encountering more resistance than expected, and they had discovered a complex network of booby traps and improvised explosive devices throughout the structure. The mission was taking longer than planned, and the team was requesting additional time to safely extract the intelligence materials. The second casualty was more serious. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez had been caught in the blast from an improvised explosive device that had been rigged to a door on the second floor. The explosion had caused severe burns to his arms and face, and Marcus could see that Rodriguez was going into shock from the trauma and pain. Working quickly, Marcus established another intravenous line and began administering pain medication and fluids. Rodriguez's burns required immediate specialized treatment that was beyond what Marcus could provide in the field, and normal medical protocol would call for immediate evacuation to the base hospital. However, the mission was still ongoing, and General Hartwell's orders had been explicit about not allowing medical evacuations to interfere with the operation. As Marcus continued treating Rodriguez, Lieutenant Commander Torres emerged from the building with an urgent expression. The team had located the intelligence materials they were seeking, but they had also discovered evidence of an imminent terrorist attack planned for the following day. The terrorists had fled the building, but they had left behind detailed plans and timing information that needed to be analyzed immediately. How long before Rodriguez can be moved? Torres asked, clearly torn between concern for his wounded team member and the urgency of getting the intelligence back to base for analysis. Marcus looked at Rodriguez's condition and made a quick assessment. The burns were severe enough that delayed treatment could result in permanent disability or even death from infection and shock. However, Rodriguez was stable enough to survive another hour if necessary. He needs evacuation as soon as possible, but he can wait if absolutely necessary. Marcus replied, knowing that his answer would likely determine whether the intelligence reached analysts in time to prevent the planned attack. Torres nodded grimly and returned to the building to continue coordinating the intelligence extraction. Marcus continued treating Rodriguez while monitoring Kim's condition and preparing for the possibility of additional casualties. The radio communications indicated that the SEALs were making progress, but they were also encountering additional booby traps that slowed their advance through the building. 20 minutes later, the situation changed dramatically. A massive explosion rocked the building as the SEALs triggered a larger improvised explosive device that had been hidden in the basement. The blast brought down a significant portion of the structure's interior, and Marcus could hear urgent calls for medical assistance over the radio. 2 more SEALs were brought to the casualty collection point with serious injuries. Petty Officer Jackson had a severe head injury from falling debris, and he was unconscious with obvious signs of brain trauma. Seaman Williams had suffered a compound fracture of his leg and was losing blood rapidly from arterial damage. Marcus now found himself treating 4 seriously wounded SEALs while the mission continued inside the partially collapsed building. His medical supplies were running low, and he was reaching the limits of what one medic could handle in a field environment. Standard medical protocol demanded immediate evacuation for all 4 casualties, but the intelligence extraction was still incomplete. The radio crackled with an urgent transmission from General Hartwell, who was monitoring the mission from the Tactical Operations Center back at the base. Torres, what's the status on that intelligence? We're getting reports that the attack is scheduled for earlier than we thought. We need that information now. Torres responded that they were still working to extract materials from the partially collapsed areas of the building, but the structural damage was making it extremely dangerous. The general's response was immediate and uncompromising. Complete the mission. Medical evacuations will commence after intelligence extraction is finished. No exceptions. Marcus heard the transmission and felt his anger rising. For seriously wounded men lay before him, and he knew that each minute of delay increased their risk of permanent disability or death. Rodriguez's burns were showing signs of infection. Jackson's brain injury required immediate surgical intervention. Williams was still losing blood despite pressure dressings, and Kim was developing complications from his shoulder wound. As a military medic, Marcus was bound by the chain of command to follow General Hartwell's orders. But, as a medical professional, he was equally bound by his oath to prioritize patient care above all other considerations. The conflict between these two obligations was about to force him into a decision that would change everything. Marcus knelt beside the 4 wounded SEALs, his hands covered in blood as he worked frantically to stabilize their injuries. Petty Officer Jackson's condition was deteriorating rapidly, his pupils showing signs of increasing brain pressure that could result in permanent brain damage or death within minutes. The compound fracture in Seaman Williams' leg had caused an arterial bleed that Marcus was barely managing to control with pressure dressings and tourniquets. The radio crackled again with another transmission from General Hartwell. "Torres, I need a time estimate on intelligence extraction. National Command is requesting immediate analysis of those materials." Lieutenant Commander Torres' voice came back strained and frustrated. "General, we've got structural instability issues. The explosion damaged critical support beams, and we're looking at possible total collapse. We need more time to safely extract the materials." "Time we don't have," General Hartwell responded sharply. "The attack could happen any minute. Push harder." Marcus checked his watch and realized that Jackson had been unconscious for over 30 minutes. In cases of traumatic brain injury, the first hour was critical for preventing permanent damage. Every minute of delay reduced Jackson's chances of full recovery. Williams was going into shock from blood loss despite the pressure dressings, and Rodriguez's burns were showing signs of systemic infection. Making a decision that would define his career and potentially save lives, Marcus picked up his radio and contacted the medical evacuation helicopter that was standing by several miles away. "Dustoff 72, this is ground medic. I have 4 urgent surgical casualties requiring immediate evacuation. Request immediate extraction to FOB Phoenix." The helicopter pilot responded quickly. "Ground medic, we're standing by for authorization from Tactical Command. Do you have clearance for extraction?" Before Marcus could respond, General Hartwell's voice cut across the radio frequency. "Dustoff 72, you are not authorized for extraction at this time. Maintain holding pattern until further notice." Marcus felt the weight of the moment as he looked at the 4 wounded men depending on his care. Jackson's breathing was becoming labored, and Williams was losing consciousness from blood loss. He made a decision that went against every military protocol, but aligned with his medical oath. "Dustoff 72, this is Hospital Corpsman Rivera. I am declaring a medical emergency and requesting immediate evacuation under emergency medical authority. For casualties will die without immediate surgical intervention." The radio frequency went silent for several seconds before General Hartwell's voice returned, filled with controlled fury. "Corpsman Rivera, you do not have authorization to declare medical emergency authority. You will stand down immediately." Marcus knew that what he was about to do would likely end his military career, but he also knew that he couldn't watch 4 men die when he had the power to save them. "General, with respect, medical emergency authority gives me the responsibility to prioritize patient care. These men will not survive another hour without surgical intervention." The radio erupted with heated exchanges as General Hartwell demanded that Marcus follow orders while the helicopter pilot sought clarification on conflicting instructions. Lieutenant Commander Torres, monitoring the communications from inside the building, made his own difficult decision. "General, this is Torres. Medical evacuation is approved. My men come first." "Torres, you are exceeding your authority," General Hartwell responded angrily. "The mission takes precedence." "Sir, with all due respect, these are my men, and I won't watch them die for intelligence that may already be compromised by the building collapse." Marcus felt a surge of relief as he heard the helicopter approaching. The pilot, Master Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, had made her own decision to support the medical evacuation despite the conflicting orders. As the aircraft landed in the narrow street beside the building, Marcus and several SEALs quickly loaded the wounded men aboard. "General Hartwell is going to crucify all of us," Walsh said as she prepared for takeoff. "Maybe," Marcus replied, "but these men will be alive to see it happen." The helicopter lifted off just as another explosion rocked the building behind them. The intelligence extraction had triggered additional booby traps, and the entire structure was now in danger of total collapse. Lieutenant Commander Torres and his remaining team members evacuated the building with what materials they had been able to recover, but much of the intelligence had been lost in the structural collapse. During the 20-minute flight back to FOB Phoenix, Marcus continued providing emergency medical care to keep his patients stable. Jackson regained consciousness briefly, a positive sign that the brain injury might not be as severe as initially feared. Williams' bleeding was under control, and Rodriguez was responding to treatment for his burns. As the helicopter approached the base, Marcus could see General Hartwell waiting at the medical facility with several members of his staff. The general's expression was unmistakable. Marcus was in serious trouble. The wounded SEALs were quickly transferred to the emergency room, where Major Chun and his surgical team took over their care. All 4 men were rushed into surgery, with Jackson and Williams requiring immediate life-saving procedures. Marcus remained in the emergency room to provide detailed reports on the treatment he had provided in the field. 2 hours later, General Hartwell summoned Marcus to his office for what everyone knew would be a disciplinary meeting. The general's aide, Captain Morrison, escorted Marcus through the command building to the general's spacious office overlooking the main runway. General Hartwell sat behind his desk reviewing a thick folder of documents while Marcus stood at attention. "Corpsman Rivera, you deliberately disobeyed direct orders from a superior officer during a critical military operation," General Hartwell began, his voice cold and controlled. "Your actions potentially compromised a mission of national importance and violated the chain of command that is fundamental to military discipline." Marcus maintained his military bearing while preparing to defend his actions. "General, I followed medical protocols that prioritize patient care in emergency situations. The Medical Emergency Authority Clause exists specifically for situations where immediate medical intervention is required to save lives. You exceeded your authority and made tactical decisions that are outside your scope of responsibility," General Hartwell continued. "Military medics do not have the authority to override operational commanders' decisions about mission priorities." The meeting continued for over an hour as General Hartwell outlined the charges being brought against Marcus, including disobedience of direct orders, exceeding medical authority, and undermining military discipline. Marcus was informed that he would face a court-martial that could result in demotion, loss of medical credentials, and possible discharge from the military. As Marcus left the general's office, he encountered Lieutenant Commander Torres in the hallway. Torres looked exhausted from the mission and the subsequent debriefing, but he stopped Marcus with a firm handshake. "What you did saved my men's lives," Torres said quietly. "Jackson is going to make a full recovery, and Williams kept his leg. Rodriguez and Kim are both stable and recovering well. Whatever happens with the general, you did the right thing." News of Marcus's actions and the subsequent disciplinary proceedings spread quickly throughout FOB Phoenix and beyond. The special operations community was small and tight-knit, and word traveled fast when one of their own was in trouble. Many of the SEALs and other special operators began expressing support for Marcus, arguing that medics should have the authority to prioritize medical care over operational concerns in extreme situations. The controversy reached beyond FOB Phoenix when media outlets picked up the story of a military medic facing court-martial for saving wounded soldiers. Medical professionals throughout the military began speaking out about the impossible situations they faced when medical ethics conflicted with operational priorities. Several prominent military physicians argued that existing protocols failed to adequately protect both patients and medical personnel in complex combat situations. Marcus found himself at the center of a debate that went to the heart of military medicine and the responsibilities of medical personnel in combat zones. Support for his actions came from unexpected quarters, including senior military medical officers who had faced similar ethical dilemmas throughout their careers. The case began attracting attention from military legal experts who argued that existing regulations created an untenable situation where medical personnel could be punished for following their professional ethical obligations. Several prominent military attorneys volunteered to represent Marcus in the court-martial proceedings, arguing that the case represented a fundamental conflict between military discipline and medical ethics that needed resolution. As preparations for the court-martial proceeded, it became clear that the case would have implications far beyond Marcus's individual situation. The military medical community was closely watching to see whether existing protocols would be upheld or whether new regulations would be developed to address the ethical conflicts that combat medics regularly faced. Marcus spent his days continuing to provide medical care while preparing for legal proceedings that would determine his future. He maintained his conviction that he had acted correctly, but he also understood the military's need for discipline and chain of command. The challenge would be finding a way to balance these competing needs in a manner that protected both military effectiveness and medical ethics. The court-martial of hospital corpsman First Class Marcus Rivera convened 6 weeks after the incident at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. The proceedings took place in a formal military courtroom at the main base headquarters, with a panel of 5 senior military officers serving as the jury. The case had generated significant attention throughout the military community, with medical personnel and special operations units closely monitoring the outcome. Colonel Patricia Hayes, a military attorney with extensive experience in medical ethics cases, represented Marcus. She had volunteered for the case after reviewing the circumstances and concluding that existing military regulations created an impossible situation for combat medics. Her opening statement outlined a defense based on both military medical protocols and fundamental ethical obligations. Members of the panel, this case is not about one medic's decision to disobey orders, Colonel Hayes began. This case is about a fundamental conflict in military regulations that forces medical personnel to choose between their professional oath and military discipline. Corpsman Rivera acted according to well-established medical ethics and emergency protocols to save the lives of 4 wounded warriors. The prosecution, led by Major James Crawford, argued that military discipline required absolute obedience to lawful orders, regardless of individual circumstances. The defendant willfully disobeyed direct orders from a superior officer during a critical military operation. Regardless of his motivations, such actions undermine the chain of command that is essential to military effectiveness. The first witness called was General Hartwell himself, who testified about the operational requirements that had necessitated his orders. He explained the critical nature of the intelligence being sought and the time-sensitive nature of the terrorist threat that the mission was designed to prevent. Corpsman Rivera's actions compromised a mission of national importance, General Hartwell testified. Military medics cannot be permitted to override operational decisions based on their personal judgment about medical priorities. Such precedent would make it impossible for commanders to conduct effective operations in hostile environments. Under cross-examination, Colonel Hayes pressed General Hartwell about the specific medical protocols that governed emergency situations. She presented evidence that military medical regulations included provisions for medical personnel to prioritize patient care in extreme circumstances, creating ambiguity about the extent of medical authority in emergency situations. General, are you familiar with Section 247.3 of the Military Medical Manual, which states that medical personnel have the authority to prioritize patient care when immediate intervention is required to save lives? Colonel Hayes asked. I am familiar with medical protocols, but they must be balanced against operational requirements, General Hartwell responded. Corpsman Rivera exceeded his authority by overriding tactical decisions. The next witness was Lieutenant Commander Torres, who provided powerful testimony about the medical condition of his wounded team members and the critical nature of their injuries. His testimony painted a clear picture of men who would have died without immediate medical intervention. Petty Officer Jackson was showing clear signs of brain trauma that required immediate surgical intervention, Torres testified. Seaman Williams was losing blood at a rate that would have resulted in shock and death within the hour. Corpsman Rivera saved their lives, and I fully supported his decision to request immediate evacuation. Major Chun, the base physician, provided expert medical testimony about the injuries sustained by the 4 SEALs. His detailed analysis demonstrated that each patient had life-threatening injuries that required immediate surgical intervention. He testified that Marcus's field treatment had been exemplary and that the decision to evacuate was medically sound. Based on my examination of the patients and review of Corpsman Rivera's field notes, I can state unequivocally that these men would have died without immediate evacuation, Major Chin testified. The medical care provided in the field was outstanding, and the decision to request emergency evacuation was completely appropriate given the severity of the injuries. The prosecution called several witnesses to testify about the importance of military discipline and the dangers of allowing medical personnel to override operational decisions. However, their testimony was undermined by the obvious fact that the 4 wounded SEALs had survived because of Marcus's actions. The turning point in the trial came when Petty Officer Jackson took the stand to testify about his experience. Still recovering from his brain injury, but cleared by doctors to provide testimony, Jackson spoke directly about the effect of Marcus's decision. "I remember being hurt and scared," Jackson testified. "I remember thinking I might die, but I also remember Corpsman Rivera working on me, telling me I was going to be okay. The doctors told me later that if I had waited another hour for treatment, I would have had permanent brain damage or died. Corpsman Rivera saved my life, and I can't understand why he's being punished for it." Similar testimony came from the other wounded SEALs, each describing how Marcus's medical care and decision to request evacuation had saved their lives or prevented permanent disability. Their testimony created a powerful narrative that resonated throughout the courtroom. Colonel Hayes called several expert witnesses to testify about military medical ethics and the challenges faced by combat medics. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a former military physician who had served in multiple combat zones, provided crucial testimony about the ethical obligations of medical personnel. Military medics swear an oath to prioritize patient care above all other considerations, Dr. Mitchell testified. This oath creates a fundamental ethical obligation that cannot be subordinated to operational concerns without violating the core principles of medical practice. Corpsman Rivera acted in accordance with the highest traditions of military medicine. The defense also presented evidence from other military medical personnel who had faced similar ethical dilemmas. Several senior military medics testified about situations where they had been forced to choose between medical ethics and operational orders, often with tragic consequences when they followed military protocol rather than medical judgment. As the trial proceeded, it became clear that the case was about more than Marcus's individual actions. Military legal experts began discussing the need for clearer regulations that would provide guidance for medical personnel facing similar ethical conflicts. The case was highlighting fundamental flaws in existing protocols that created impossible situations for combat medics. The closing arguments focused on the broader implications of the case. Colonel Hayes argued that military effectiveness actually required medics to have clear authority to prioritize medical care in emergency situations. Members of the panel, this case will determine whether we trust our military medics to make life and death decisions based on their medical expertise, or whether we force them to watch wounded warriors die because of operational priorities, she concluded. Corpsman Rivera acted with courage and integrity to save lives. We should be honoring him, not punishing him. The prosecution's closing argument emphasized the importance of military discipline and the dangers of allowing individual judgment to override lawful orders. However, the strength of the medical evidence and the testimony of the saved SEALs had clearly affected the panel. After deliberating for 8 hours, the panel returned with a verdict of not guilty on all charges. The decision was met with applause from the gallery, which was filled with military medical personnel and special operations soldiers who had supported Marcus throughout the proceedings. In explaining the verdict, the panel noted that existing military regulations created ambiguous situations that needed clarification. They recommended that military leadership develop clearer protocols for situations where medical ethics conflicted with operational requirements. The recommendation from the court-martial panel prompted a comprehensive review of military medical protocols by senior Pentagon leadership. A special commission was formed to examine the ethical challenges faced by military medical personnel and to develop new regulations that would provide clear guidance for emergency situations. 6 months after Marcus's court-martial, the Department of Defense issued new regulations that significantly expanded the authority of military medical personnel in emergency situations. The new protocols, known as the Rivera Guidelines, established clear procedures for medical personnel to prioritize patient care when immediate intervention was required to save lives. The regulations created a framework that balanced operational requirements with medical ethics, providing commanders and medical personnel with clear guidance for handling conflicts between military and medical priorities. The new protocols required operational commanders to consult with senior medical personnel before denying medical evacuation requests and establish procedures for medics to appeal decisions that they believed would result in unnecessary casualties. Marcus continued his military service and was eventually promoted to Chief Petty Officer. He became an instructor at the Navy's medical training facilities, where he taught future military medics about the ethical responsibilities of their profession and the importance of advocating for patient care even in challenging circumstances. The 4 SEALs whose lives Marcus had saved all returned to active duty after recovering from their injuries. Petty Officer Jackson suffered no permanent effects from his brain injury and continued serving with Special Operations units. Their recovery served as a powerful reminder of the importance of prioritizing medical care in emergency situations. Lieutenant Commander Torres was promoted to commander and continued leading Special Operations missions. He often spoke about the importance of the Rivera Guidelines in ensuring that military medical personnel could provide optimal care without fear of disciplinary action. General Hartwell, while initially opposed to the changes, eventually acknowledged that the new regulations improved both military effectiveness and morale. The clear protocols eliminated the ambiguity that had created conflicts between commanders and medical personnel, leading to better cooperation and more effective operations. The Rivera Guidelines became a model for military medical protocols worldwide, influencing how armed forces around the globe balanced operational requirements with medical ethics. Military medical schools began teaching the case as an example of how individual courage and ethical conviction could lead to positive changes in military policy. Marcus's actions on that day at FOB Phoenix had saved 4 lives and changed military regulations that affected thousands of military medical personnel worldwide. His willingness to risk his career to uphold his medical oath had created a legacy that would protect both wounded warriors and the medics who cared for them for generations to come. The case demonstrated that military effectiveness and medical ethics were not incompatible when proper protocols were in place. By providing clear guidance for emergency situations, the Rivera Guidelines allowed military medical personnel to focus on providing optimal care while maintaining the discipline and chain of command essential to military operations. Years later, Marcus would reflect on that critical moment when he chose to prioritize his patients over military protocol. He never regretted his decision, knowing that it had not only saved 4 lives but had also created a framework that would protect countless others in similar situations. The general who had once shouted orders that would have cost lives had inadvertently set in motion changes that made the entire military medical system more effective and more ethical.